Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. Apologies for not putting an episode out last week. I was in bed with the flu and I ran out of episodes that I was able to publish. I could barely even look at my phone in bed, so there was no chance of me putting an episode out. So, apologies for that. And today's episode is going to be shorter. There will be times where you can hear me trying to stifle a cough, and it's going to be a bit of a slow process for me to record this, but as and when my voice allows me to, so apologies for not being the longest episode ever. However, in the vein of it not being a very long episode, we are going to focus on sprint triathlon today. Now, in my eyes, I still think that the sprint triathlon is probably the purest form of tri. I think it's the one where transitions are the most impactful. You're moving throughout the sports quickly, and it is much more a test of pure athleticism and fitness rather than how many hours can you fit into training in a week, which sometimes can be what sort of Ironman feels like it comes down to, where somebody who trains for 20 hours a week is quite often going to outclass somebody who can only train for 10. Sprint triathlon is a little bit more of a leveler. Now, first of all, I wanted to address the concept of the personal best in triathlon. This is something of a sort of a contentious subject. This is mainly due to the huge amount of variation in courses out there. You could go to an event that is completely pan flat, such as Eton Dorney outside London, which is an incredibly popular venue, and then go somewhere where it's a little bit hillier, and the times really aren't going to be that indicative of necessarily improved fitness. If you go from doing a very hilly course to doing a very flat course, chances are you should be faster by default. And even from flat course to flat course, day to day, Eton Dorney is very exposed. So there can be a lot of crosswinds, a lot of headwinds when you're out on the bike as well. So it is not super easy to be able to say, oh yes, this is my time over the sprint triathlon. Same way that you might be able to in a running event, a pool event, or to an extent like a bike event, a time trial, in isolation. However, we are athletes. It is in our DNA to want to get fast. And if you are going back to the same course sort of repeatedly, if it is a venue such as Eton Dorney, sticking with that example, there must be about 20 events that are held there over the year. So you can go back and sort of weather conditions aside, you can get a pretty good idea of how it is that you're measuring up. Again, I attend throughout the year a race in the Cotswold Water Parks, part of a midweek series run by LPS Events, and I turn up 4 times a year and I race that same course, so I can track my progress there. Now, the first thing that people start thinking about is how many hours should I train? What sessions should I be doing? What supplements should I be taking? And they start to really want to find out what the secret sauce is. But beating any kind of personal best, it really comes down to a little bit of self-reflection, really, and trying to understand where you are at the moment and what's stopping you from getting where you want to be. Now, in triathlon, we can luckily look at the 3 different sports and we can go, okay, well, how is it that we can close the gap here? What is it that's stopping me from being able to get whichever sport it is that I struggle with up to the level I want it to be for competition? However, when it comes to the answers to these questions, they can feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. Using an example of an athlete, Tom, that I worked with a couple of years ago, he came to me and he wanted to go under 2 hours 20 for an Olympic triathlon, which is a real sort of milestone for people to reach. In the end, we ended up going 2:12, I believe. 2:11. So we absolutely annihilated our goal. How did we do that? Now, when Tom came to me, he was an incredibly strong cyclist, and he would love to go out on the weekend long rides. He did I think it was a Wednesday night chain gang with riding partners where they go out and they smash each other to bits. Love doing hard intervals on the turbo. and we do he was doing 3 or 4 bike sessions a week. And I said to him, look, how is it, you know, how are we going to improve our other disciplines? Oh, well, we need to do this. I said, no, the way that we improve our Olympic triathlon time, sprint and Olympic are relatively similar in a number of ways. The way that we improve this time is that we put less focus on the bike and more focus on your run. And that's really hard for him to come to terms with because his bike was what was strongest, it's what he was proud of. We said, you know what, let's just put our faith in it. Let's still keep those hard sessions. Let's keep that Tuesday night chain going. Let's keep that weekend long ride with the club. Let's keep in most of the sessions that you enjoy, but we're also going to be doing a lot more in the way of the run. We're going to improve our run and our swim by focusing less on the bike. And that is the kind of uncomfortable conclusion that you might come to. So let's start our self-reflecting process by going through the individual sports and how it is that we'd be able to improve in these. So let's look at the swim to start with. Now there are 3 sort of aspects which could well be holding you back. It could be a selection of all 3 of these. It's not necessarily that there's only one. Chances are we could all improve all 3, but we do need to be sensible. If we are only swimming sort of twice, maybe 3 times a week, there's only so many of these things that we can focus on at once. Now the first one is our swimming technique, and this is something that is especially important if you are new to the sport. If you've been in sport for several years, such as myself, it's not to say that you need to stop working on your technique. However, it wouldn't necessarily provide the best return on investment. Whereas when it comes to a lot of those who are newer to the sport, if you're not comfortable in the water, if you find yourself not moving through an efficient way, then improving your technique is probably going to be the single biggest thing that's going to help improve your swimming time. However, there is an issue that lots of people struggle with, which is they focus too much on their technique for too long. They have it in their head that they want to finish working on their technique before they focus on their fitness. But the thing is, you're never going to finish working your technique. It's never going to be at a point where you can say, right, technique's finished, let's start with the hard fitness training. And this kind of a crutch that people sort of rely on because they don't like swimming hard because it hurts. And they use the fact they want to work on their technique as sort of an excuse. I remember I was at a swimming event and there were a couple of friends of mine and they're watching this woman who's an absolute fantastic swimmer just tearing the field apart. And the 2 of them watching her swim, and this one goes to the other, oh, why is it you think she's so fast? Someone goes, oh, it's all technique, innit? And don't get me wrong, she had a beautiful technique, but I'm also pretty sure she was in the pool 6-7 times a week. There is, if you're just saying, oh, it's all down to technique, that's almost a disservice to all of the time that and all the hard work that somebody's putting in the pool. Yes, she will be doing some all this technique work to make sure that she is a technically brilliant swimmer, but there's also just a lot of really hard, long sessions, hard work that those 2 weren't prepared to put in. However, we do need to work out something resembling a sort of an inflection point where if somebody is very new to swimming, they really do need to spend all of their time on technique. But there will come a point in their progression where our focus needs to switch away from technique and more towards fitness. Now, a lot of coaches will disagree with me on this, and that's fine. But I believe that if you have a brand new swimmer, once they have got to the point where they are swimming at 2 minutes per 100 as an average for their longer, consistent, steadier swims, I think that 2 minutes per 100 is the point where we can go, okay, I think it really is time to shift away from the main focus of our sessions being technique focused, where we're no longer spending all session going up and down the pool, doing all sorts of drills and practice back and forth, where we really are starting to go, okay, let's start doing some sprint work, let's start doing some threshold work, Let's try building our muscular endurance. Let's try building our force. Let's use paddles, where you can really sort of branch out, branch away from that kind of that safety net of the technique work and go, look, let's actually learn how to swim fast now. However, regardless of how good your technique is, regardless of how fit you are in the water, none of this matters for much if you can't swim in open water confidently and fast around other people whilst wearing a wetsuit. So that open water familiarization aspect is another part of the trifecta that we need to start thinking about. So if you fear the swim and you are just struggling to even get round to complete the swim, if it feels like you're putting a huge amount of effort for very little in the way of return, you need to focus on your technique. If you are putting a huge amount of effort in the swim, if you're feeling good in the water, if you're feeling in control, but your times just aren't where they want to be, if you're swimming around about 13 minutes for the 750, where you know that you realistically you need to get it down to about 11, 12 minutes to win your age group or qualify for an event, chances are fitness is where you need to spend your time. You need to be focusing on longer swims and you need to be focusing on harder swims as well. And if you are perfectly happy in the pool, if you have a good background swimming, if you're really happy with what you're doing in the pool, but you just can't translate that into performance on race day, then you do need to focus a lot more on spending time in open water. This is a big mistake that I made when I first started the sport. I didn't like open water swimming, so I didn't do much of it. Guess what? If you don't like doing it, it just means you have to do more of it. It just means you have to keep swimming in open water until you feel much more confident, until you can line up on race day, you can get in that cold water and you can feel okay. I'm not saying you have to love it, but I want you to at least be used to it. Next up, let's move on to the bike. Now, if you want to get faster, there is an element of being able to buy speed on the bike. There's no getting around that. If you get yourself a pair of clip-on aero bars, that is probably the best bang for your buck in the entirety of triathlon, if you're not currently using them. If you can then get yourself a full triathlon bike, if you can get yourself deep section wheels, if you can get yourself an aero helmet, all of these upgrades you can get, these will make you faster. Chances are all of you are sat there thinking, yes, I know, Simon, you're not teaching us anything new. What we want to do instead is sort of focus more on our fitness. I'd much rather somebody focused on their fitness than focused on just buying gear, because that's why we're in the sport, really, isn't it? To get fitter, to become healthier, rather than just be bolting expensive add-ons to our bike. But that's not to say there isn't a place for them if you are looking for speed. Now, the biggest influence over somebody's cycling speed is always going to be their cycling power, realistically, isn't it? And for the sprint distance, the higher somebody's FTP, the faster they're going to go. There is quite a direct relationship between FTP and sprint performance. Now, when you are training to develop your FTP, this can be via virtual races, threshold intervals, all of this. There is those classic kind of FTP building sessions, events, exercises that you can do. However, at the end of the day, FTP is a measure of aerobic fitness. And the best way to develop aerobic fitness is to do lots of long rides. And this is something that really sort of throws people, because they think, well, yeah, but you may be doing a sort of a sprint triathlon, focusing on the sprint distance, at least for now, because you don't have much time to train. And don't get me wrong, there is a lot more you can achieve with limited hours over the sprint distance than there is over longer distances. However, if you look at the training of the very best sprint and Olympic triathletes in the world, those who race at the very top of the WTCS series, their hours that they put in each week, they're not as dissimilar from Ironman athletes as you might think. And a lot of their sessions in the week, if they train 3 times a day, which I think is relatively common for a lot of triathletes, then they can they may well go out for sort of a 4 hour ride. Now, if you are looking at training for 20, 25 hours a week, maybe even more, as a professional athlete, there's only so much intensity that you can fit in, even when you are looking at training for a event such as a sprint, where it is an all-out effort. If you're going to be able to train for 20, 25 hours a week, a lot of those hours have to be at a lower intensity. They just have to be, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to recover in time. And so you look at the training of some of these pros, and it could just be a 4 hour go and ride your bike. There might be a few efforts in there, especially if they're riding with other athletes. Have a few intervals, push on a few hills, keep the legs waking up, turning over, because we are training for sprint triathlon after all. It's not like Ironman, where we have to be incredibly disciplined about staying in zone 2 for everything. But at the end of the day, the more hours that you put in, the better your aerobic fitness becomes, the more efficient your lungs become at processing oxygen. That is going to increase your FTP. Not simply those hard intervals, so there's definitely a time and a place for them when you're training for a sprint triathlon. But just hours in the saddle is going to be an absolutely enormous sort of predictor of somebody's fitness, even over shorter distances. Now, if we're looking simply beyond our ability to grind out massive power on the bike, we also need to look at our riding skills, our ability to be able to go downhill, to go around corners, to be able to handle our bike, the kind of things that triathletes, when all said and done, just aren't that good at. I know this is a sweeping statement, but so often I can be on a triathlon course and I can be passing people who they're just going around corners so tentatively because they just haven't really learned how to corner their bike very well. And they're losing an enormous amount of time in the process. Or they get to a hill and they go a lot harder than they should, try and get over that hill, and then they are really sort of paying the price for that effort later. Now, we touched on aerodynamics, all the aero kit that you can buy at the start of this section on the bike. And what aerodynamics do is they make you more efficient, they help you travel faster for less effort than if you don't have these upgrades. Now, that's something that we do need to apply to all areas of our cycling, not just our aerodynamics. The best thing that you can do for your sprint triathlon performance is to be able to pace it nice and consistently. Now, if you are coming down a hill and you've got some real momentum behind you and you come up to another hill, yeah, that's the time where you do need to get out the saddle, push some hard watts to try and maintain that momentum, because that is the most efficient way for you to carry speed with the watts available to you. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to push really hard on hills and then soft pedal on the flats. Some newer triathletes spend so much time in fear of the hills that they see the flats as just being recovery between hills. Now, if they were to be able to take the hills easier, to be able to take the hills slower, if they had to be more efficient with the use of their gears on the hills, that's going to help enormously when it comes to reducing the amount of fatigue that they generate over the course of that ride. Because at the end of the day, yes, we want to maintain a really smooth power. We want to, if our target is around 220 watts on the bike, yes, we do want to come close to that 220 watts. We want to avoid parts where our power really drops below this. We want to avoid our power really spiking much above, say, sort of 250 watts. We definitely don't want to go over 300 watts. We want to have a nice smooth application of power. But at the end of the day, power doesn't mean much. What means more on race day is speed. And it all comes back to how much speed am I generating, how much speed am I maintaining for a given effort. And this, I think, is an absolutely massive misconception that people have when it comes to triathlon, which where they just think more power is always better. And look, if I have the option between averaging 35 kilometers an hour at 250 watts or the same speed at 220 watts, which do you think I'm going to choose? Okay, if I am setting myself up for the best run possible, I want to output as little power as I can to be able to hit my goals. Now, this isn't to say, oh, you don't need to worry about the hard training, you just need to focus on being efficient. That's not the case at all. I still want you to do those really hard sessions. I still want you to have an absolutely massive FTP. But if you have an FTP of 300 watts, I want you to be able to go out and to ride at sort of 280 for a sprint triathlon, and to be able to do that somewhat comfortably and carry a load of speed efficiently. What I don't want you to be doing is I don't want you to be riding at 300 watts, sat bolt upright with your clothing flapping around in the wind, surging, tiring yourself out, and just not being an efficient cyclist and getting passed by people who are doing less power than you are. Next up, I'm going to touch on the run. And this is one that is a little bit harder to quantify than the other two. However, it is very much where you find out whether your race has gone well or badly. I do not want somebody to get onto the run and to be already starting to make excuses of, oh, I went too hard on the bike, oh, I just had such a bad swim, if it wasn't for this, if it wasn't for that. Okay, if you had a mechanical on the bike, yeah, that sucks. But I want you to be starting the run, I want you to be thinking positively. I want you to be excited, I want your legs to feel good, and I want you to think, okay, even if the run isn't my strongest discipline, I'm going to finish strong. I'm going to minimize the people passing me, and I'm going to do everything that I can to mitigate the damage. Because it's really common for people to struggle on the run. There are a lot of people who are fantastic swim bikers who just can't run that well. And they spend a lot of the race sort of swimming and cycling scared of the fast runners in the field that are coming up behind them. But as with my client Tom, who I spoke about at the start of the episode, they have it in their head that they're not very good runners. And so maybe they've never really applied themselves to their run training because they feel that the best way for them to improve their time is to focus on the swim and the bike instead. And that may always be their strongest. They may never be great runners. There are plenty of examples of some of the very sort of best triathletes who are just never going to be top tier runners. However, with a little bit of self-reflection, we can go a hell of a long way to improving our run and being very self-critical sometimes, having to really sort of face up to some uncomfortable truths and really find out what it is that is stopping us from being a better runner. So, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what's stopping me from running faster? And I'm going to use myself as an example here to start with. When I am running fast over 5k or 10k, what it is these days that is holding me back is my ability to get oxygen into my lungs. I'm running along and I just feel like I've hit a speed limiter. That my body just is refusing to allow me to run any faster than it is. And that is simply due to my aerobic fitness. It is my body's ability to process oxygen, to turn it into ATP, to turn it into energy. However, there have been times in my running career where what is holding me back is burning in my legs. It is the inability to be able to maintain that level of effort with my sort of muscular endurance as it is. I am pushing really hard, I can feel my legs filling up with lactic acid, and it is my muscular system that is letting me down. It's my muscular system that's preventing me from running faster. And realistically, this is key to us improving our running. Now, if I've used myself as an example, my aerobic fitness is what's holding me back. So all it's really going to take for me to improve my running is to do more of it. It's to do more in the way of longer runs, zone 2 runs, steady state runs. Just improve that time on feet, improve my body's ability to process oxygen until the point where when I start to do harder efforts, that my legs are now the limiter, and that's when I know that I can switch towards harder intervals. Equally, and this is what I think a lot of people struggle with who are fantastic cyclists, is that their aerobic fitness is fine, their lungs feel great on the run, but it is their legs, the ability to pick them up, to keep them turning over, their legs getting sore, their legs getting tired, is that their legs just don't have that resilience, they just don't have that ability to be able to maintain this effort for a prolonged period. Now, if this sounds like you, then you need to do more in the way of hill reps, threshold sessions where you're running for sort of a kilometre at threshold, rest for a minute, well, probably a bit more than a minute, and then go and repeat these efforts. You know, we are trying to really overexpose our body to this hard, impactful run training. Now, we do need to be a bit careful with this. If we do go a little bit too hard, we do run the risk of injury, which is why I think hill reps are great because they come with a lower risk of injury relative to other intervals. But if your legs are the weak link, you just need to spend more time running hard. And there's also a lot to be said for people who are really struggling with that explosive element of their running, where they just can't pick their feet up, where they just haven't got that bounce that other athletes have when they overtake them. And this is something that we do tend to lose as we get a bit older. But by doing plyometric training, by doing skipping, jumps, bounds, box jumps, this kind of strength training, that is going to revolutionise our running performance. And sometimes somebody's ability to do these drills, these exercises, is going to be what's really holding them back. Now, speaking of running and strength work, injury is something that is also a huge barrier to people being able to achieve their potential with their running. Because they get better, they run more, they run faster, and then bang, they get injured. And this quite often is due to somebody not wanting to do strength training. For Ironman athletes, a lot of them seem to appreciate and understand the need for strength training more, whereas somebody training for a sprint or maybe an Olympic distance event, they're a bit more like, oh, I just want to get out there, I just want to be running hard, I want to be training hard, I want to be going fast all the time. And they don't see strength training as helping them achieve their goals. However, if you're constantly struggling with niggling hamstrings, Achilles tendinopathies, all of these issues that could be prevented with a good strength and mobility program, that's going to have an enormous impact on your ability to be able to train consistently and to be able to actually achieve your potential in running. So, we've then sort of looked at the three sports and how it is that we can identify our weaknesses in each, how it is we can improve in each. Now, there are a lot of other issues that could become sort of a limiter for somebody. I've just looked at the most common ones that I've seen as a coach. We do also need to acknowledge over sprint distance just how impactful transitions are. If you are going to be out there for around about an hour and you're going to spend around about sort of 5 minutes of that time in transition, you have the potential to sort of take a huge amount of time out of your PB just for more efficient transitions. Now, I often try to get people to think about their 5k time because this is something that most triathletes know and would be looking to improve their time. And they go, I just want to get under 20 minutes for my 5k. And if you were to take somebody and go, oh, your sort of your 20-minute 5k, sort of 20-minute and like 5 seconds, 20 minutes, 3 seconds, you're just struggling to get under. What if we were to give you 19.5 minutes? Wow. Like, can you imagine 30 seconds off of your 5K time? That's absolutely enormous. I mean, you bite somebody's arm off, right? But what if you could save a minute just in T1? I mean, it doesn't sound as sexy, but when you look at the whole race, when you take a step back and look at it all, you kind of think, wow, okay, yeah, I guess that's actually a lot more impactful than I thought it would be. So I'm going to talk you through a good fast transition. Now, a good transition starts when you arrive at the event venue, when you can have a look around, when you rack your bike and you start to get a feel for the layout. Okay, so where am I going to come out the water? Once I come out the water, how am I going to spot my bike? Where am I going to be looking to head towards? All of these issues like this. Then you want to set up your bike. And as you're setting up your bike, you want to make sure that it's left in a sensible gear, that you can start pedaling as soon as you get on your bike. You want to have your helmet and your race number in positions where you know that you can't forget them. And you want to make sure that everything is lined up in a way that's going to make it really easy, really accessible for you, so you can switch your brain off as you come into transition and you don't have to think, oh yes, but what about this? And I've got to remember to do this. It's all there, it's all in front of you, it's all super simple. So as you are finishing the swim and you come into that last kind of 100 meters, I'd like you to start thinking ahead to your transition and start kicking your legs harder than you have been previously. Again, I don't want somebody to turn into a motorboat, but we want to get blood flowing through the body. The reason for this is sort of twofold. First off, a lot of people will suffer with a level of dizziness as they come out of the water, which we want to avoid, and we can avoid that by getting that blood moving around, get the blood to our brain quicker. Secondly, it just allows our legs to jump into action a little bit more as soon as we come to the edge of the water. Now, most events will have people at the swim exit to help pull you out the water. Use these, don't be proud, don't try to just pull yourself out yourself. Use them, they can save you a few seconds, really give you a little bit of a sling forwards, maximise that momentum. Now, as soon as I come out the water, I'm immediately undoing the Velcro at the back of my wetsuit, undoing the zip and rolling it down to my waist. I'm taking my goggles and my hat off and I'm running along with them in my hand. So I've got goggles, hat in my hand, wetsuit rolled down to my waist before I've even got to my bike. Now, when I get to my bike, I am rolling my legs out of my wetsuit, and this is never an especially easy, graceful thing to do. If you watch the very best triathletes, they do struggle with this. And it is something that does take a little bit longer. It is going to take slower for you to be able to get out of that wetsuit than the very best pros. So don't beat yourself up if you do get yourself stuck. You can get your legs out of your wetsuit simply by sort of marching on the spot, by having one foot on the floor, on the wetsuit, and pulling the other foot up in the air violently to get that leg fly, sort of try to really get it out of the wetsuit whilst you fiddle with your helmet. That is what some of the very best will do. However, most people, there is going to come a point where you do need to reach down and just pull it over your ankles, get it over that timing chip, get that last bit of the wetsuit off there. Once your wetsuit is off, please just take 2 seconds to place it somewhere considerate underneath your bike. Don't leave it over somebody else's gear. Don't leave it sprawling over somebody else's transition kit, okay? It's not good. Just take a couple of seconds to make sure that you're not massively inconveniencing someone else. Next up, assuming that you haven't been doing this already, is putting on your race number. I don't think this is necessary in certain regions, but in Europe, we need to have our number on for the bike. This is normally done on a race belt, and so you're just grabbing it off the floor, clipping it around your waist. Don't worry exactly about which way it's pointing at this point. This is something you can sort out whilst running with your bike if needs be. Next up is the all-important helmet. So you need to grab your helmet, stick it on your head, and clip it up nice and quick. At this point, you should be ready to start the bike realistically. So, assuming that your shoes are on your bike, if they're not, then you need to stick them on at this point. But you're going to grab your bike off of your racking, and depending on how fast exactly it is that you want to be, I would encourage you to run with your bike to the mountain line. The most efficient way to run with your bike is to hold the saddle and run with it. However, this is not something you should practice for the first time on race day. The reason it's the fastest is because if you're holding onto the saddle, then you can run in a very straight, standing upright position with a very natural running posture. If you're holding the handlebars, you're bent over and you're just not going to be able to run as fast. Once you get to the mountain line, I want you to mount within your comfort zone. I do not want you to try a flying mount for the first time if you've never practiced it before. Okay, this is a very good way for you to injure yourself, fall off your bike, do yourself a mischief, damage something. Okay, this is something that you need to build up to slowly. Now, a flying mount is the most efficient way to be able to get going on the bike because you spend the least amount of time stationary. You're able to sort of flow with the bike, get up to speed on the bike, and then focus on getting your feet into the shoes. Many people will use something of a scooting mount where they'll place their left foot on their left pedal and they'll push off of the ground with their right foot, swing it over the bike, stick it into the shoe that way, which is a much lower risk than doing a full flying mount, and you only lose a couple of seconds. Next up, I'm going to look at transition 2, which is a lot simpler affair than transition 1 really. You come in off the bike. Now, how it is that you dismount, again, is completely up to you. I'm not going to tell you that you need to do a sort of a very fast, very efficient dismount. However, if you do want to absolutely optimize everything, do practice this vigorously before you try it on race day. Now, once you are coming off your bike, it can be quite difficult if you're towards the front of the field because there aren't many bikes in transition. In fact, if you are the first cyclist, for instance, you may have absolutely no bikes to give you your bearing to show you where it is that yours should be. So you really do need to spend the time to acknowledge where it is that your bike should be, not just for when you run to it to pick it up to start the bike, but also where you drop it off at the end of the bike as well. Which is why I quite like to leave a small colourful towel in front of my transition spot to make it really easy for me to find when I'm in transition and my brain's not working very well. Now, when you get to your racking, you want to make sure that you are sticking your bike on there efficiently and quickly, but not to the point where it's going to start swinging around, okay? Make sure the saddle is nice and square. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have your bike sort of taking up 2 or 3 spots because you just dropped it there quite quickly. It does increase the risk of it getting blown off in the wind or damaged by other competitors. You may have already taken your feet out of your shoes if you've decided to do a nice efficient mount. If not, you do just need to pop them out of your feet, out of your cycling shoes as quickly as you can and stick your running shoes on. Now, whether you use elastic laces, whether you use any other kind of fast tightening laces, it's really up to you. Lock laces, that's the word I'm looking for. It's up to you which ones you use. However, I would highly recommend against sort of leaving traditional shoelaces on your shoes that you have to tie a bow in. Okay, you really want your shoes to be set up so that you can get them on in a matter of seconds. And from here, you quite simply run towards the run out. Now, I really do want to make sure here that I point out that you may want to save as much time as possible in transition, and I really encourage that. However, what you want to avoid is you want to avoid making poor decisions in transition for the sake of saving time. So this could be a case of if it is absolutely throwing it down with rain and you think to yourself, oh, you know what, I won't need socks. Okay, I'm going to save the time and I'm going to go without socks. If you know that your feet are going to end up absolutely chewed up with blisters by the end of that run. Yes, it's only 5k. You may only be out there for sort of 20-ish minutes, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but that's still a lot of time with which you can really hurt your feet. Now, if this is your biggest race of the year, if you're trying to qualify for the GB team, for instance, then sure, maybe you do need to sort of forget the socks and just go and just deal with the consequences in the days after. However, if you are the kind of person who enjoys racing regularly and just training every day, having your feet absolutely covered in blisters because you didn't spend 10 seconds putting socks on, is that really a price worth paying to save that bit of time? So that's the end of my guide to transition, which wraps up this podcast really. Now, beating a sprint triathlon time, it does involve a lot more hours than people think it might. It's not the kind of thing that you can do easily on sort of 6 or 7 hours of training a week. Now, obviously, there will come a point where you are going to see gains thick and fast when you start out in the sport, and when you start doing more structured training, you will see those gains. However, you are going to hit a bit of a glass ceiling if you don't have the ability to train for more hours in a week. One final bit that I wanted to touch on to answer a question by a client of mine, which sort of inspired this whole episode, was saying, look, I understand that if somebody has hours and hours to train, that polarized training might be the best option for them. But what about somebody's looking to beat a sprint time? When is the trade-off of hours? How many hours a week should you spend on training, and what kind of spread of intensity should you have? Now, almost every bit of research that has come out has supported, regardless of how many hours somebody trains or the distance they're training for, that the majority of their training should be at a relatively low intensity. And the reason for that is that triathlon is an aerobic sport, damn it. There is very little sort of situations where you are, as a triathlete, going to be really digging deep for a short period of time. Even the very shortest events are going to be at least an hour in length. I know that some of this has felt a little bit wishy-washy in some respects. You may be wanting more in the way of hard and fast answers from me, but I'm afraid it's very difficult for me to tell you how exactly it is that you need to improve without knowing you better as an individual. So if you are interested in having a conversation with me about how it is that I can help you beat your sprint PB, check out my email address in the show notes and you can drop me an email. That's all from me this week. Apologise for it not being the greatest episode in the world, but I'll be back next week, hopefully with a little bit more energy and we'll be sounding a little bit more human. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe out there.